Hello everyone, and welcome back to The Story Sleeper. Here on this channel I share classic stories and fairy tales to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we start, I would like to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, get comfortable and relax. I was flying home from a business trip one quiet September evening, just me and my little Cessna 172. The sky above was calm, brushed with the last whispers of daylight, and a cool breeze gently rocked the wings from time to time. I was cruising at about 5,500 feet, drifting slowly above long stretches of farmland just outside Wichita, Kansas. The sun had dipped below the horizon maybe 20 minutes earlier, leaving the world wrapped in that soft, in-between glow. Not quite daylight, not quite night. A dusky veil stretched across the earth, casting long shadows across the fields below. It was a route I'd flown 100 times before, familiar, routine. But that evening, something was different. It began with a flicker in my peripheral vision, something off to my right, glinting faintly above the cornfields. At first, I thought it was another aircraft, or maybe just a distant drone. But as I looked more closely, it didn't make sense. The object shimmered in the fading light, metallic and quiet, hanging motionless in the air like a thought not yet spoken. Its shape was unusual, almost disc-like, but not quite. More angular, as if someone had gently pressed a diamond into softer curves. It didn't blink. It didn't hum. It simply floated, smooth and silent, as if the sky had conjured it for just that moment. I told myself it must be something experimental, some military craft or weather drone. Nothing unusual, really. But then, it moved. Not with the drifting grace of a balloon or the slow arc of a plane. No. It shifted direction instantly, slicing a perfect 90-degree turn without a sound, without a tremor. It was as if the object had no weight at all, as though it slid on invisible tracks drawn across the air. I've flown small planes for years. I know how the air moves. I know how weight resists. What I saw defied all of that. For a long second, I just stared. Then it slipped quietly behind a ridge of trees and disappeared. I blinked, adjusted course, tried to keep it in sight. But when I passed over the ridge, there was only sky. Empty. Open. Silent. I glanced down at my instruments. All normal. No flickers, no faults. The radio was still and calm. Alone in the cockpit, I sat with a racing pulse, gently guiding the plane forward, my hands cooler now against the yoke. I told myself it was nothing, that I'd imagined it. The rest of the flight was quiet. The sky darkened gently around me, and the lights of home glimmered in the distance. I landed just after 8, touching down smoothly on the familiar strip near my house. The engine sighed to silence, and I sat for a moment longer, breathing in the hush. That's when I saw them. two men standing beside my truck at the edge of the airstrip. They wore matching black suits, simple and clean, the kind you'd expect to see on someone from the military or the government. No badges, no names, just stillness. They watched me in silence as I climbed down from the plane. I hesitated, then approached, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" One of them stepped forward, his voice smooth and even. "Do you believe in physics or just experience?" I blinked, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" The other man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black device, no bigger than a deck of cards. It had a screen, a few buttons, and a quiet hum. He didn't say a word, just tapped at it slowly. I turned slightly, glancing back at the quiet runway behind me. Something about their calm unsettled me. Still, I kept my voice low. "I saw something strange," I said softly. "A metallic object. It moved in a way that didn't make sense." The man with the device looked up. He nodded once slowly. "We know." There was a pause. Then the first man asked, "Did it feel like it was aware of you watching?" I hesitated. The question shouldn't have made sense, but it did. I searched for the right words. "I don't know," I whispered. "It didn't blink, didn't make a sound. But the way it turned, it felt intentional." They exchanged a glance. Then the second man spoke again. "Things like that don't happen by accident. You've seen something you weren't meant to." I wanted to ask more, but the words felt heavy in my throat. Instead, I managed, "Who are you?" Neither of them answered. The first man simply said, "You'll hear from us again. Until then, keep this to yourself." No threat, no explanation, just a quiet instruction. Then they turned and walked away, stepping into a black SUV parked just off the gravel. The engine started, and the vehicle rolled off down the road, its tires whispering over the dust. I stood alone under the deepening night, the hum of insects rising in the fields around me. My heart was still beating hard, but the wind was soft again. The stars began to peek through the haze above. The static on the radio had lasted no more than 30 seconds before fading into silence again. Just a strange burst of sound, a soft, crackling interference that left the rest of the instruments perfectly untouched. Everything else inside the cockpit was calm, functional, normal, except my handheld GPS. It had started losing signal again, only for a few seconds, and only in that same patch of sky, just above those quiet Kansas cornfields. I checked the plane inside and out. No damage, no signs of interference. Everything was as it should be. But still, something wasn't. Lisa noticed it too. She said I looked different when I came home from flying, tenser, as if I were carrying something I couldn't put down, like I'd flown through a dream I couldn't quite wake up from. I don't think I was imagining any of it. A few weeks later, I ran into Mr. Jenkins, an old crop duster pilot, weathered and kind, the kind of man who measured his words carefully. I told him half expecting a chuckle or a dismissive shake of the head about the strange object in the sky and the men in black waiting beside my truck. But he didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly and said, "You're not the first." He told me that others had seen odd things in the sky over those same fields. Strange lights, silent shapes. People just didn't talk about it much anymore. I felt strangely relieved. Not safe, but not alone. I kept flying. It was part of me. But I started steering clear of that airspace, giving it a wide berth, as if the sky itself had drawn a boundary I wasn't meant to cross again. The men never came back. I never saw them in town, never caught their SUV again. And yet, sometimes, when I'm alone in the cockpit and the sun is setting just right, a certain glint flickers in the corner of my eye, a flash of movement that's too precise, too deliberate. And I wonder who or what is still watching. Far away from Kansas, in the deep forests near Ashland, Oregon, another quiet evening unfolded under a velvet sky. My name is Jen Marshall. I'm a wildlife biologist. That season, I was tracking nocturnal animal behavior, mostly owls and bats, and had set up a small trailer on the edge of a wide, silent clearing deep in the trees. The nights were long but peaceful, filled with the quiet rhythm of wings and echoes. One night, around 11, I stepped outside the trailer to check a few motion sensors by the tree line. The air was crisp, the kind that smells like pine needles and the breath of damp earth. Still, cool. Not even the leaves stirred. As I scanned the forest with my flashlight, something caught my eye above the treetops. A faint glow, hovering about 100 feet above the canopy. At first, I assumed it was a drone, or maybe a small helicopter, but there was no sound, not a buzz, not the low hum of blades, just silence. The light didn't blink. It didn't move like any drone I'd seen. It hung there, steady, pale, a white light with a soft, bluish tint that made the leaves shimmer. It felt wrong. Not dangerous, exactly. Just out of place, as though it belonged somewhere else entirely. I pulled out my phone and tried to take a picture, but the camera struggled to focus. The glow was too soft, too strange. It blurred and flared on the screen. A few frames, and then it was gone. Simply vanished. One moment there, the next, only stars. I rushed to check the motion sensors and trail cameras, but the footage was plain. No signs of light, no disturbance. The owls and bats behaved just as they always had. I kept watching the skies for several nights after that, but the glow never returned. Then, about a week later, just after dusk, there was a knock at the trailer door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I paused, then opened it slowly. Two men stood there, both wearing dark suits with long black coats. No uniforms, no agency logos, but each wore a small laminated ID on a thin chain around the neck. I asked who they were. They introduced themselves as Agent Blake and Agent Crane, said they were from a federal wildlife compliance office, a name I'd never heard before. Their voices were calm, measured. They asked if I'd noticed any anomalies in migration patterns, any unusual animal behavior, anything strange. I hesitated. The light floated behind my thoughts like a whisper, but I simply said, "No, nothing out of the ordinary. Everything's been normal." Crane nodded, but his eyes held still, studying. Then Blake said, "We've been reviewing some of your recent field reports. Some of the entries seem imaginative. We're here to help bring everything into alignment." They asked to see my notes and data files. I agreed, though my stomach tightened. For the next hour, they quietly reviewed the pages, said very little. Then they packed up and left, but not before placing a sealed folder on my desk. Corrected data. I opened it later that night. Inside were printed copies of my own reports, but with changes, slight ones. The animal movements were smoother, more regular. The oddities had been erased. Details I remembered writing, gone. It was still my work, but reshaped, softened, as though reality had been gently edited. After the visit from the two agents, I tried calling the agency names they'd given me, but every number either disconnected or rang endlessly into silence. No one I asked had heard of them. No one knew anything about a federal wildlife compliance office. It was like they had never existed, and yet, the memory of them sat heavy in the back of my mind. In the days that followed, strange things began happening. The animals I had been tracking started to act differently. One morning I found a dozen birds beneath a roost, perfectly still. No signs of injury, no visible trauma, just stillness, quiet and final. The bats stopped coming out altogether. I called the local wildlife center, hoping someone had noticed similar patterns. But there were no other reports. Nothing out of the ordinary, they said. Everything seemed normal, but I knew it wasn't. Some nights, as I walked near the tree line, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye. Shifting shadows just beyond my reach. Always silent. Always retreating when I turned. I couldn't tell if it was animals or something else. Once I heard a low hum again, deep and distant, like an engine turning slowly in the sky. But when I looked up, the stars were clear. No planes, no clouds, only the hush of night. My phone began to glitch. Static during calls, strange distortions on the screen. The camera refused to focus near the trees. Then one morning, my laptop was simply gone. Not physically, but unusable. Blank. As if its memory had been erased. I tried returning to my work, tried to carry on. But every time I came close to some breakthrough, something interfered. Data would vanish. Files would be altered. Notes I distinctly remembered typing would no longer be there. The men never returned. But I found traces of them. Small things. that same sealed folder left in my drawer again, with corrected data printed in the same sterile font. People around town began mentioning routine wildlife compliance visits, even though no one could say who had come or when. Eventually, I moved my trailer a few miles deeper into the woods. I stopped field work for a while. Something about the forest had changed. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It had become attentive. Still, on certain nights, I return. I step quietly into the clearing and listen. Just the usual owl calls, the hush of needles underfoot. No light, no visitors. Just a lingering question that never quite fades. Two men who didn't belong, and a forest that no longer feels like it's sleeping. I'd planned that weekend hike for weeks. I needed space, air, a few days away from the city, away from glowing screens and crowded sidewalks. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35. I live in Portland, but I spend most of my free time exploring the more forgotten corners of Oregon. That October, I picked a trail near the remnants of an old Cold War radar station high in the Cascades. It was quiet country, remote, rarely visited, mostly trees and mist. By the time I reached the site, the sun had dropped low behind the ridges, and a thin layer of fog had begun curling between the trunks. I set up camp just past the tree line, not far from what was left of the old installation. Scattered slabs of concrete and a few rusted antenna towers, leaning like skeletons against the sky. It was around 7 p.m. when I heard it. A low hum, deep and constant. Not mechanical, not natural. It vibrated faintly through the ground and the air, as though the forest itself were breathing with a strange rhythm. I froze, listening. It was coming from somewhere just beyond the edge of the trees. I took my flashlight and walked slowly toward the sound. That's when I saw them. Lights. Small, soft, flickering pale blue. They moved beneath the canopy like floating embers, not beams, not flashlights. Just quiet orbs, gliding slowly through the darkness. I couldn't tell how many there were or how far. They didn't behave like any lights I'd seen before. They made no sound, no movement of branches, no footsteps. I stood there for a long time, watching. Then I quietly stepped back and returned to camp, unsure what I'd seen, unwilling to disturb it. That night I slept lightly, waking often to listen, but the hum never returned. The next day, I hiked further up the trail. Nothing unusual, just trees and wind and a few early snowflakes drifting between the branches. Back at the small cabin I'd rented about 10 miles away, I sat on the porch that evening with a cup of coffee, watching the stars. That's when I saw the car. A black sedan, just visible through the pines, moving slowly along the gravel road. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then I realized it had no headlights. Just a silent silhouette, gliding past my cabin, headlights off, windows dark. It passed by without changing speed. Exactly 1 hour later, it came back. Same car, same route. Still no lights. This repeated for the next 2 nights. always the same time, always without a sound. I tried to flag it down once with my flashlight. No response, no brake lights, no sign of life. Just that same steady motion. On the third night, I asked a man at the local diner about it. A quiet, older guy with a worn flannel shirt. I mentioned the car, and he paused. "You sure it wasn't just a truck or something?" he asked, cautious. "No," I said. "No lights. Always at the same hour." He nodded slowly. "Some folks," he muttered. "Keep an eye on that place. You never know." I didn't ask more. That night, after the car passed again, I heard the hum. Faint, somewhere out there in the dark, just beyond the tree line. I stood by the window, staring into the forest, but nothing moved. The forest felt heavier, as though the air itself had thickened around me, wrapping gently around every branch and shadow. I still looked for those strange lights from time to time, but none returned. When I wandered back to the old site, something felt subtly changed. Some of the weathered concrete slabs were cracked, newly so, as if something heavy had quietly rested there not long before. I took a few quiet photos, not sure why. I couldn't quite explain the feeling, something like standing at the edge of a forgotten dream. That evening, I told myself I'd leave in the morning. The sensation of being watched had grown, not in a loud or urgent way, but like a soft breath lingering just behind me. Nothing ever moved. Nothing ever called out. But the silence itself had a weight. Before bed, I checked the locks on the cabin's doors and windows. Not out of fear, just a quiet kind of caution. There was an unease, steady and low, like a note held too long beneath the surface of thought. Just after midnight, I stirred from sleep. That same low hum had returned. But this time it was fuller, deeper, less a sound and more a presence. It passed through the walls, humming slowly, like a great engine far below the earth, turning without urgency. I stepped to the window and looked out. Calm, curious. Across the road, the black car had returned, but it didn't approach, just sat still, tucked into the shadows, engine silent. Its form rested in the dark like something half remembered. I watched quietly, my breath slow and steady. Time stretched thin. The car door eased open, and a figure stepped out. I couldn't see details, only the shape of someone in dark clothing, standing very still. After a while, they returned to the car. It drifted away, silent as mist. I didn't sleep again that night, but I rested, wrapped in the hush of trees and the soft hum beneath everything. At dawn, I packed my things and drove away. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a strange coincidence, or an echo from a dream too close to waking. But the hum, the stillness, the way that car seemed to wait without needing anything, they stayed with me. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest, but sometimes, when the wind drifts just right in the early hours, I think I can still feel it. That faint hum like a soft vibration at the edge of sleep. And maybe, just maybe, it's still listening too. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sound, no brilliant flash, no sudden beam of light. It simply sank behind the ridge, quietly, gently, and was gone. I didn't slam the brakes. I just eased my foot off the gas and coasted to the shoulder, the car humming softly beneath me. For a moment, I sat in stillness. The engine idled, a low and steady rhythm. I watched the horizon, trying to decide, had I seen a crash, a gliding aircraft, a drifting balloon? But I'd heard no impact, no thud, just that strange, silent descent into the hills. Then, behind me, twin points of light began to appear in the rearview mirror. Far away at first, just small, flickering glows. But they moved closer, quickly, faster than I expected. A black SUV, plain, unadorned, not lifted or loud. Just a smooth, dark shape with deep-tinted windows and unfamiliar plates. Not Nevada, not California. Government, perhaps, but not any I recognized. It pulled onto the shoulder behind me and stopped, maybe 15 feet back. The headlights blinked off, but the engine stayed on, quiet and steady. No one stepped out. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still, no one came. I cracked the window slightly. Cool desert air slid in, brushing my cheek. No sound except for the soft hum of my own car and theirs. I adjusted the side mirror, leaning slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of the driver. But the glass was too dark. All I could see was a shadow, a vague presence behind the wheel. Then, slowly, the SUV began to move. It rolled forward, silent, controlled, until it was even with my window. It didn't stop abruptly. It just glided there beside me. No one looked over, no one rolled down the window, just the low hum of an engine and an interior cloaked in darkness. We sat like that for 20 seconds, maybe less. Then it continued on. No flash of speed, no dramatic turn, just smooth and unhurried, until its taillights faded into the night. I sat still for another minute, gathering my breath. The rest of the drive was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels thick and listening. I got home around 1:30 a.m. My house is small, just outside of town. 2 bedrooms, a fence, a cracked driveway that leads to a dry creek bed in the back. I let myself in, turned on the kitchen light, fed the cat. Everything looked normal. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, tried scrolling through my phone even though I wasn't really looking for anything. About 20 minutes passed. That's when I heard it. A knock. 3 gentle taps. Not loud, just knuckles on glass. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. Then it came again. Same rhythm, soft and even. I walked slowly to the front window, pulled back the curtain. No car in the driveway. No figure on the porch. Just the street outside. Still and dark. I turned on the porch light and opened the door. No one was there. But taped to the center of the glass, right at eye level, was a black envelope. matte finish. Square corners. No writing. Held in place with a single strip of black tape. I stared at it. The air felt colder somehow, like a window had opened somewhere behind me. After a long moment, I peeled it off. It wasn't sealed, just folded. Inside was a single card. Heavy, thick, the kind you'd expect from a formal invitation. And on it, just one line, printed in the center. Not everything drifts down. That was all. No signature. No return address. Nothing to explain what it meant, or who had left it. I stepped out onto the porch again, looked both ways. Nothing. Even the porch light felt dimmer than usual. The night folded back in around me. I didn't sleep. Didn't call anyone either. What could I have said? The next morning, I checked the security camera feed, the one by the door. It's motion activated and sends clips to my phone. The last alert was from 8:17 p.m., hours before I got home. Then, nothing. A blank span until sunrise. I never threw the envelope away. It sits in the drawer beside my bed. I've shown it to no one. But I think about it sometimes, especially when nights feel too quiet. I was working the overnight shift at a quiet weather station near the serene Sreto Mountains. My name is Jordan Mills, and I've been with the National Weather Service for about 5 years now, mostly doing radar operations and remote monitoring from small, peaceful outposts like this one. The station rests on a ridge, about 10 miles east of the mountain range, isolated and hushed, nestled in the quiet. The nearest town is more than an hour's drive away, and it's the kind of place where the silence is so deep, any unusual thing you see feels like it belongs only to you. That night, in late April, around 10 p.m., the sky was still and calm, and I was doing my usual scan on the Doppler radar, just gently observing wind patterns, looking for signs of precipitation, the steady rhythm of my work echoing the tranquility of the place. But earlier that evening, something unusual had appeared. A large, unmoving shape began to glow softly on the radar screen, hovering gently above the northern part of the Sangradetto range. At first, I thought it was a glitch, maybe interference, but it stayed, quietly suspended there. It didn't drift, didn't shimmer like a cloud, didn't announce itself with a storm. I tried adjusting the equipment, calibrating, listening to the steady hum of the console, but nothing changed. The shape remained, solid, quiet, and too well defined to be natural. It was large, far too large to be anything ordinary, and it didn't show up on satellite imagery, just the radar, just there. Then, around midnight, the old landline phone rang. Its tone cut gently through the stillness. Calls at that hour were rare. I hesitated, then picked it up. A man's voice came through, low, calm, emotionless. "We need to come by your station," he said. "It's regarding the equipment." I asked who he was, but the line went silent. There was no ID, no static, just quiet. I turned back to the radar. The shape still lingered. The silence around me felt heavier now, like the room itself was holding its breath. At 1:30 a.m., a soft knock echoed through the front door of the station. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one came out this far unannounced. I checked the security feed and saw two men standing outside. Both tall, mid-40s perhaps, dressed in matching black coats, pressed and smooth, untouched by mountain dust or wind. Their hair was neatly slicked back, their faces unreadable. I cracked the door open. One of them nodded politely. "Good evening. We're here to calibrate your radar." I hesitated. No one had mentioned a visit, and no one was supposed to come at this hour. But they showed me a badge, faintly embossed, with no logo I could place. It looked official, in a vague sort of way. They entered silently and walked to the radar console, their movements precise and unhurried. I watched, trying to follow their keystrokes, but they typed in codes I didn't recognize, shifted frequencies, rerouted streams of data, all without a word. Only the quiet hum of the equipment filled the space between us. 20 minutes passed. They finished, packed up without fanfare, and walked to the door. A nod. Nothing more. Then they vanished into the night as silently as they'd come. When I returned to the console, the shape was gone. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but the stillness felt unnatural. The screens flickered slightly, and the air inside the station felt heavier somehow. I checked the system logs. The last 8 hours were missing, not deleted, just as if they'd never existed. I called dispatch. They had no records from our station for that time. When I reported this to my supervisor in the morning, he seemed confused. Told me no one had been authorized to visit the station, and that the security feeds showed no one entering. But I'd seen them, spoken to them, let them in still. He said to write it up and move on. That day, I drove into town and sat quietly at a little diner, sipping coffee and trying to clear my head. A few locals dropped by, but no one had noticed anything strange in the skies that night. The days passed. The radar worked fine. No return of the shape. Just the quiet rhythm of routine. But every now and then, on especially still nights, when the mountains seem to hold their breath, I swear I hear it again, the soft hum, like the station remembers too. Eventually, I started the car again and eased back onto the quiet highway. And just behind me, they did the same. The dark vehicle continued to follow, never close enough to alarm, but never far enough to forget. I drove for another hour beneath the fading light, past Albany. The gas gauge had dipped low, and I began scanning for a place to stop. Not long after, I exited near a small Sinocco station just off Route 9, somewhere close to Kinderhook. By then, the sky had settled into its deep nighttime blue, the kind that swallows the trees and softens the edges of everything. While I was filling up, the black car pulled into the far end of the lot, quietly, deliberately. Still no plates. Still no movement. I walked into the station to pay in cash, mostly so I could keep an eye on them through the windows, half watching their still silhouette under the orange lights. When I stepped back outside, they were parked directly beside my car. The driver's window was down now. Inside sat a man, maybe in his late 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a simple black baseball cap and a dark zip-up hoodie. His expression was neutral. No smile, no frown. Just still. Without a word, he reached out the window and held something in his hand. A small black USB stick. "Replace your footage with this," he said quietly. I didn't speak, I didn't move. He repeated it, a little firmer, but never loud. "Replace your footage with this." His face remained unreadable, not threatening, not warm, just flat. I took the USB stick. Not out of fear exactly, more like instinct. He rolled up his window, reversed, and calmly drove away. I stood there for a long while just holding it. The cold had settled into my gloves by the time I got back into the car. The rest of the drive home was uneventful. No more black car. No sign of anyone. Just me, alone on the road, thinking. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I plugged the USB into an old laptop I hadn't touched in years. Its fan whirred softly to life. On the drive, there was only one file, a single video labeled vid.mp4, 10 minutes long. I opened it. No images. Just a flat gray screen. There wasn't even static. Just that dull, featureless gray and faint crackling, like an old vinyl record left too long on the player. Every few seconds, a high-pitched tone rang out, soft and sharp, like a television warming up. That was all. I watched it from start to finish, waiting for something to shift or appear. But it never did. I never shared the footage I'd taken on the hike. I didn't delete it either. But when I tried to open it, the file wouldn't load. Just a message. Corrupt file. I tried everything. Copying, renaming, different software. Nothing worked. Even the thumbnail was just black. A week later, I drove back up to Indian Lake. Not to hike, just to see if the white outback was still there. It wasn't. But in the exact same parking spot was another black car. Different make. Same absence of plates. I didn't stop this time. I just kept driving. That was last fall. I haven't been back since. We hadn't gone looking for anything unusual. My friend Greg and I were just spending a quiet weekend at his uncle's hunting cabin, way up north in Minnesota. The cabin was tucked between a frozen lake and a stretch of snow-packed logging roads. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no neighbors. Just an old wood stove and enough firewood stacked to last the season. We arrived Friday evening, just after dark. The temperature hovered around 12 degrees, but the sky was beautifully clear, scattered with more stars than I'd seen in years. We brought food, some beer, snowshoes. The plan was simple. 2 nights of peace and maybe a bit of hiking. Just some stillness. Saturday morning was slow and quiet. Coffee, eggs, the silence of snow pressing in on the windows. Around 11, we set out. There's a narrow trail that starts behind the cabin, winding through clusters of birch and pine, past a long collapsed shed, then climbing steadily toward a ridge. Greg remembered there used to be a fire tower up there. Said the last time he'd seen it was 10 years back. We packed light, thermos, granola bars, snowshoes, and moved quietly through the forest. The snow was deep in some spots, but firm enough that we didn't sink much. The climb wasn't steep, just patient. 2 hours later, we reached the top. There it was, the fire tower, still standing somehow, weather-beaten and rusted, its wooden steps gray with rot. A faded no trespassing sign hung crookedly from one of the supports, barely clinging on. We didn't climb it, just stood there for a moment, breathing deep, watching a few crows fly overhead. It was barely 3:30, but the sun was already dipping low, casting everything in that gentle, bluish winter hue. That's when Greg touched my arm. He pointed just beyond the trees to the west, past the tower. Floating there, maybe 30 or 40 feet off the ground, was a light. A pale white orb, round and still, about the unspoken, size of a basketball. It didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered in perfect silence. At first, I thought it might be the sun catching on ice or metal, but it was too high, too focused, too quiet. Greg whispered, "That's not right." There was no wind, no sound of birds, not even the creak of trees, just stillness. I took out my phone to snap a picture, but the screen glitched, bands of static flickering across it. When I looked back up, the orb had shifted, just slightly, a few feet higher, a little to the right, still without sound or effort. It remained for a long minute. Then it simply vanished. Not like it flew away. It was just gone. Greg muttered something under his breath. We should head back. Neither of us said much on the way down. We walked faster. There was a feeling in the woods, a quiet tension, like being watched from just beyond sight. Nothing visible, no sound, just a presence, staying exactly out of view. When we got back to the cabin, dusk had fallen. We didn't take off our boots, just poured a drink and sat in silence. Later that night, after a few whiskeys, we tried to make sense of it. A drone? A flare? Something to do with the weather? But none of it fit. The way it moved. The absolute quiet. The feeling it left behind. That night, I barely slept. Every time I drifted close, I thought I heard something outside. Soft crunching in the snow. I'd sit up, wait. Then silence again. Greg tossed and turned too, though neither of us spoke. The next morning, we decided to drive into town, just to get out of the woods for a while. There was a small shop about 30 minutes away, sold propane, jerky, and strange hand-carved crafts. We bought snacks, filled the tank, talked about anything else. When we got back, someone was sitting in Greg's truck. The vehicle hadn't moved. Same spot, untouched. But in the passenger seat, there he was. A man in a black suit, black coat, pale skin. mid-50s, clean-shaven, no hat, just sitting there like he'd been waiting. We froze. The man opened the passenger door slowly and stepped out. He smiled, too wide, too long, not threatening exactly, just wrong, like someone imitating what a smile should look like. He said, "That wasn't meant for you." His voice was soft, clear, as if he wasn't speaking aloud at all, but directly into our heads. Greg asked, "Who are you?" The man said nothing more, just kept smiling. Then he turned and walked calmly into the woods. No coat, no gloves, no hesitation. We didn't follow. We didn't move. After a while, Greg opened the truck door. Everything was as we'd left it. Except it was warm inside, like the heater had been running. But the keys were still in Greg's pocket. That night, we didn't speak much, didn't light a fire, just locked the doors, kept the blinds shut, and sat in our coats and boots until morning. We left early, haven't been back. Greg's uncle still says we're welcome any time. We just keep finding reasons not to return. And honestly, I'm not sure I could explain what we saw, or what saw us. I remember seeing that floating light, and the man in a suit who walked through the snow as if it wasn't there. I still don't know how he got into the truck. That night, I was driving home from work around 12:40 a.m. The road was empty, just quiet fields on either side. Suddenly, my radio started cutting in and out, and my headlights dimmed, flickering like they couldn't decide whether to stay on. Then, up ahead, I saw something hanging in the air above a field, a huge black triangular shape. It wasn't moving much, just slowly drifting, with 3 dull red lights underneath. There was no sound at all. The air felt still, like time had paused. I pulled over and watched quietly as it slowly rose and disappeared into the night sky. The next morning, a black car without plates was parked in my driveway. 2 men in dark suits stood outside. They asked if I had seen anything unusual the night before. I told them I had. One asked if I often imagined things at night. I said no, I knew what I saw. They left without another word. That night, my dog refused to go into the backyard. She just stood by the door, watching the sky silently. Since then, every time I drive home at night, I take a different route. The memory lingers, soft and unsettling, like a whisper in the dark. I went back into the tent, and for a while everything felt normal, quiet and still. The next morning, when I unzipped the tent, I saw something strange. The fire pit stones, which I'd left scattered, were now arranged into a perfect circle. Not just a rough circle, but perfectly even, like someone had measured it carefully. I hadn't moved them, and I don't forget things like that. I took a photo of the circle, but later that picture corrupted and vanished. Around noon, I decided to hike a nearby trail. About 30 minutes in, I saw a man standing just off the path. He wore a crisp black jacket and pants, like some kind of security uniform, but without any badges. He asked if I was camping alone, then asked to see my camera. I hadn't taken it out since I arrived, but gave it to him anyway. He didn't check the photos, just held it for a moment, then told me, Please don't take pictures of the fire rings." Then he turned and disappeared into the trees, like he vanished. That night, I barely slept. I kept waking up, hearing footsteps just outside the tent that faded whenever I sat up. The next morning, the stones around the fire pit were moved again, this time scattered in a strange curved pattern like a tail. I left them and haven't camped alone since. Later, in mid-September, I went to my cousin's fishing cabin by a quiet lake in Minnesota. One night, while drifting in a small boat, I saw a soft, pulsing light hovering above the water. It was round and white, dimming and brightening slowly, then shifting to a pale orange. No sound, no flicker, just calm and steady. I watched for about 10 minutes, frozen in place. Then, just like that, it vanished. I stayed on the lake a while longer, unsure what I'd seen. Back at the cabin, I slept only a few hours. The next morning, thick fog rolled in. Then a black SUV appeared, tires crunching over the rocks. 2 men stepped out, dressed in black suits without ties, silent, serious, and watching. One man was tall and thin, the other broader, maybe in his late 50s. They didn't say who they were. The older one asked if I'd noticed anything strange on the lake the night before. I laughed and asked, "Like what?" He smiled, but it wasn't warm. He mentioned lights, shapes, and electrical problems. I said I didn't know. He asked if my depth finder had logged anything odd. I told him it was off. I wasn't mapping, just fishing. The tall man stayed silent, quietly watching the water, holding a notepad but not writing. The older man asked if my phone or radio had interference. I said there was no signal out there. He nodded and advised me to fish somewhere else for a while, sounding tired, like giving advice he'd been told himself. They left in a black SUV with no plates. Later, I checked my depth finder's log. The SD card was gone, removed without unlocking, which I never would do. That night, I packed up and left early. I haven't been back. My name's Paul Donovan, 32. Last fall, driving late in northern Arizona, I lost time. I left Flagstaff at 8 p.m., planning to stop near Winslow. The weather was clear and cold, stars bright. I remember being tired but calm. Then, nothing until I woke up at 5:47 a.m. in my parked car on a dirt road I didn't recognize, with fogged windows and no signal. The gas tank was half full, though I don't recall filling it. I walked a mile to a paved road and found a motel. Inside, a woman said no one had been around since last night. I rented a room, still confused. At 9 a.m., a man in a black suit and coat knocked. He didn't say who he was, just, "You're back early." I opened the door a crack, but he vanished. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. My heart raced. I didn't tell anyone. Later, GPS showed a big gap and strange detours. My car was fine mechanically. I don't know where I was or what happened, but now I watch the road carefully when driving late, especially on quiet back roads. My name's Clara. One late September night in Vermont, I was photographing stars. The sky was clear, no moon. I noticed a star blinking slowly, in a rhythm unlike planes or satellites. It stayed still for 15 minutes, then slowly lowered behind the trees. I got some photos, told my friend Maggie, who joked maybe it was a plane. But I knew it was different. A few days later, in the quiet library, a man in a black jacket sat near me. Without looking up, he asked if I was still watching the sky. He warned, "Be careful what you look for. Some things aren't meant to be found." Then he left a card with just a name, E-Cross, and a phone number. No company. I didn't call. That night, I waited outside, but the blinking star didn't return. Afterward, strange things happened. My phone lost signal randomly, my camera battery drained faster, and I felt watched, a quiet awareness nearby. One evening, a dark car passed me slowly twice. No plates, the driver's face hidden. The second time, he looked right at me. I hurried home. I told Maggie, who said I should report it, but it felt too strange, like no one would believe me. One night, I left the back door slightly open while I was inside. It was warm enough, so I didn't think twice. I was editing photos when I heard a low humming outside. Soft, distant, like a quiet engine, but smoother. It lasted about 20 seconds, then faded. I stepped outside and looked up, but the sky was empty. No blinking lights, no strange shapes. The next morning, my camera was missing from the kitchen table where I'd left it. The back door was closed, the lock intact. I never found the camera. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I stayed indoors trying to forget it all. But I kept thinking about that blinking star, the slow descent, and the man in the library. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear that low hum again. I was out in the middle of nowhere again, chasing a story about strange crop damage near La Mesa, Texas. I'm Sarah Donovan, a journalist drawn to rural mysteries, the kind of stories people forget or laugh off. This one started with a farmer's call about odd patterns in his cornfield. I thought maybe pests or weather, but I wanted to see. The day was hot, the air dry and dusty. The corn was mostly healthy, except for a patch about 50 feet wide. Stalks bent and flattened in strange ways, like someone had carefully pushed them down. I photographed the field from many angles and noticed a faint metallic smell in the air. The farmer, Jim, was nervous but said little, just, "It's not normal." That night, in my motel, my phone rang. The number showed, but no one spoke. Just static and faint clicking. Then I heard slow, steady breathing. I listened for 2 minutes, but nothing more. Calling back went straight to voicemail. Jim told me I wasn't the only one getting those calls lately. No one talked, just that strange noise. Some say it's nothing, but it feels like something. I left town feeling watched, a quiet weight on my chest. I kept checking my rearview mirror, but saw no one. That evening, at my apartment, someone knocked. It was nearly dark. When I opened the door, a man dressed all in black stood there, eyes hidden beneath a cap. He said quietly, "Stories can disappear too." then walked away. I looked back through the peephole. He was gone. No car, no footprints. After that, my phone kept ringing with silence, clicks, and breathing. I stopped answering. The crop damage story slipped away. Notes I'd written seemed to change. Photos showed shadows I didn't remember. I told a few friends, but no one else saw or heard anything. I don't know what it meant. Just that I was caught in something not meant to be talked about. One late summer night in northern Michigan, my family and I were outside by the fire pit, roasting marshmallows. The air was cool but gentle, stars bright overhead. My son Max and daughter Abby were playing with a flashlight. Suddenly, Abby pointed silently toward the woods. 3 perfect circles of soft white light floated slowly across the yard, about the size of basketballs. They glowed gently, moving side by side. No sound, no flicker, just smooth and steady, gliding a few feet above the grass. My wife Lisa and I exchanged a look. Max was wide-eyed. I tried to take a photo, but my phone screen went completely black. The lights drifted toward the trees and disappeared without a sound. That night, I kept watching from the kitchen window. The yard was quiet again. The next morning, Lisa noticed our neighbor, Mr. Garrison, speaking quietly with a man in black clothing, jacket, pants, even a cap pulled low. I asked Mr. Garrison about it, but he denied talking to anyone. Later, Lisa found our mailbox unlocked. Inside was a thin black folder. No writing, no label. It felt warm to the touch, as if heated by the sun, even though it was cool outside. We put the folder on the table, but it stayed warm for hours. That night, our kids were restless, and Lisa kept looking out the windows, expecting the lights to return. For days after, we all felt watched, a quiet presence just out of sight. I heard faint humming noises, sometimes outside, sometimes inside the walls, just enough to make me stop and listen. One morning, the black folder was gone without a trace. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. Mr. Garrison kept to himself, avoiding my gaze. We never saw the lights again, but sometimes when I'm outside alone, I glimpse something beyond the yard's edge. A flash of white light, a shifting shadow between the trees. And every time I wonder if someone is still watching. I was camping alone near the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho. The nights were chilly, but the days still warm enough to sit outside and watch the sunset. One evening, just after twilight, I was sitting by the fire watching the stars come out. Then, I noticed a soft, pale blue light hovering quietly a little above the ground, drifting slowly without any sound. It moved gently behind the ridge, disappearing among the trees. A little later, I saw a black car parked quietly near my campsite. The engine was running softly, but no headlights were on. I hadn't heard it arrive. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a dark suit, neat and buttoned up, with a thin black tie. His face was calm and expressionless, and he moved slowly, almost like he was part of the night itself. I didn't say anything. I just watched as he stood there quietly, still as the night around him. Then, without a word, He turned and walked away into the dark woods, disappearing into the shadows. The forest stayed silent, and I felt the night wrap gently around me, as if the world was holding its breath. He came closer and looked me straight in the eye, standing maybe 10 feet away. "Some things aren't meant to be found," he said quietly, with no introduction or explanation. I wanted to ask what he meant, but no words came out. He nodded once, then turned and walked back to his car. Slowly, he drove off, the red tail lights fading into the trees. I stayed there a long time after he left, watching the spot where he disappeared. The forest was still and quiet, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I wasn't sure if I should stay or leave, but I chose to stay the night. Morning came and the clearing looked normal. No footprints besides mine. No sign the car had been there. I packed up and left, driving the winding mountain roads, thinking about the light, the man, and his strange warning. I don't know who he was or what it all meant, but it stayed with me on the long drive home. The sky was clear and full of stars. I stopped my truck on the shoulder, turned off the engine, and pulled out my phone to take a picture. But when I opened the camera, the screen flickered, then went black. I tried again. Same thing. After a few minutes, the strange glowing light began to fade, slowly dimming, until it vanished completely. The desert was quiet, except for distant coyotes and the soft breeze. My heart beat a little faster, but I stayed calm, wondering if I had seen something real or just a trick of light. I started the engine and prepared to drive on when headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A black sedan pulled up behind me, windows dark and no license plate. The driver rolled down the passenger window. "You didn't see anything," he said calmly. I blinked. "Keep your eyes on the road," he repeated. His face was hard to read, but his eyes were steady. Then, without another word, the car sped off silently into the night. I looked back in my mirror, but there was nothing. No lights, no signs of the car. Just the quiet desert and stars. Later, at the truck stop, I checked my phone again. The photos I tried to take were gone, deleted, as if they had never existed. I told a few people, but most didn't believe me. Maybe they thought I was imagining things. But the feeling stayed with me. The feeling that the road isn't just asphalt anymore, that something watches from the dark. I watched the footage again, and the man who seemed in charge looked up at me and said quietly, "This is not your story to tell." Before I could ask what he meant, they stood and disappeared into the trees, like shadows slipping away. At home, when I tried to watch the video, the files were corrupted. They would open for a moment, then freeze or show static. No recovery tools could bring them back. Without the footage, my story sounds like a dream, or maybe a trick of light. But the memory is real. The lights, the men in black, their calm warning. Since then, I've stayed away from those mountains at night. Whenever I look up near that ridge, I wonder if the lights will return. But I think I'm not meant to find out. One morning, I woke up in my car on the side of a highway. My head was pounding, and I had no memory of how I got there. My phone was cracked and dead. Then a black sedan pulled up behind me, shiny and quiet. The window rolled down, and a man in a black suit leaned out. Calm, unreadable. "Not yet," he said softly. Another man got out, same style, serious. They told me I had seen something I shouldn't have. I tried to argue, but my mind was foggy. They said they would help me remember, but I had to stay calm. The first man showed me a small notebook. It asked where I had been around 10 p.m. the night before. I said I was at home, but they said I had been somewhere I didn't belong. They showed me a small silver badge. No words, no logos, just a plain rectangle. "You'll want to cooperate," they said. I sat there, heart pounding, feeling heavy, like the air was thick. Then the car pulled away slowly and disappeared down the highway. I drove home quietly, glancing in the mirror, half expecting the black sedan to follow. Another night, driving near a power plant, I saw strange lights hovering. They moved slowly, blinking in a pattern that didn't make sense. I pulled over to watch, but my phone flickered and went dark when I tried to take pictures. Then 2 men in black suits arrived. No badges, no explanation, just cold professionalism. They asked questions, watched me carefully, and told me the company was handling it and asked for my discretion. Then they left, driving off without a sound. Since then, my phone acts strange, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch a glimpse of a black car just out of sight. I don't know what any of it means, but I do know some things are better left unseen. The air felt heavy, thick around me. Then the car pulled away slowly, disappearing down the highway. I drove home quietly, stealing glances in my rearview mirror, half expecting the black sedan to follow. Another night, near a power plant, strange lights hovered above the towers. They moved slowly, blinking in patterns that made no sense. I pulled over to watch, but when I tried to take pictures, my phone flickered and went dark. Then 2 men in black suits appeared. No badges, no explanations, just cold, quiet professionalism. They asked questions, watched me closely, and said the company was handling it all. They asked me to keep quiet. Without another word, they left, slipping away into the night, soundless. Since then, my phone has acted strangely, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch a glimpse of a black car just out of sight. I don't know what it all means, but some things are better left unseen. I was out hiking alone in the San Gabriel Mountains just north of Los Angeles on a late spring afternoon. The air was warm but still crisp, and the sky was mostly clear, with just a few wispy clouds resting near the horizon. I had started around 3 in the afternoon, planning to enjoy a few hours before sunset on a trail I hadn't explored before, somewhere between Eaton Canyon and Mount Wilson. Nothing fancy, just a quiet day to clear my head. The hike was peaceful. Only a few other people were on the trail, most turning back early. I ventured deeper past the main junction, heading toward a ridge that offered a beautiful view of the valley below. Around 5:30, I stopped in a small clearing and took a sip of water. That's when I noticed something strange to the east. At first, I thought it was a helicopter hovering far away, maybe a news chopper, but it wasn't moving like any helicopter I'd ever seen. The shape was smooth, metallic, and kind of oval, with no visible wings or rotors. It hovered silently, just above the treetops, over the ridge. The low sun caught the object in a strange way, making it shimmer like metal brushed with oil or mercury. I fumbled for my phone and snapped a couple of pictures, zooming in as best I could. Then, just like that, it vanished. No whoosh, no sound. It simply blinked out, like someone had switched off a lamp. I scanned the ridge where it had been. Nothing. No aircraft. No drone. No sign of anything unusual. I stood frozen for a moment, caught between excitement and disbelief. I looked around, but I was alone in that quiet spot. After a minute, I packed up and started heading back down the trail, my mind racing, but my legs moving on autopilot. When I got back to the trailhead parking lot, around 6:45, just as the sun was beginning to dip, 2 men stood near my car. They looked out of place. No hiking boots, no backpacks. Both wore black suits, black ties, and crisp white dress shirts. Their hair was neat, almost too perfect, like they'd just stepped out of a suit ad. One of them had sharp, almost gaunt features. The other was shorter and stockier, wearing dark glasses even though the sun was low. They didn't say hello. One asked simply, "Did you take any photos today?" I glanced at my phone on the passenger seat. "Yeah," I said. "I got a couple of pictures of something weird near the ridge." The taller man's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "We need you to delete those photos, for everyone's safety." I blinked, caught off guard. "Why? What's going on?" "No reason for you to know," the shorter man said flatly. "It's best if you forget what you saw and don't share anything." I felt my stomach tighten. I don't think that's something I can just do. They exchanged a brief look. Then the taller one leaned in slightly, speaking softly but firmly. "We're not asking for a favor. We're telling you. Delete the photos. Don't talk about it. Move on." I swallowed hard, looking between their serious faces and my phone. It felt like I was in a bad movie. "I'm not comfortable with that," I said, stepping back. "Is this some kind of joke?" They didn't laugh. The shorter man pulled out a small black device from his jacket pocket, something I couldn't quite make out. "We don't want to escalate this," he said quietly. "You cooperate and nothing happens." I held up my hands. "Look, I don't want trouble. I'm just a hiker." They stared at me for a moment longer. Then the taller one nodded to his partner. Without another word, they turned and walked toward a dark sedan parked a few spaces away. The engines hummed to life, and the car pulled out slowly, then sped off down the road. I stood there long after they were gone, heart pounding, hands trembling slightly. I picked up my phone and stared at the photos again. They weren't perfect, just blurry glimpses of that strange metallic shape against the sky. But they were real. For a moment, I thought about deleting them, erasing every trace. But deep down, a part of me refused. Some memories, no matter how unsettling, are meant to stay. It felt like whatever that thing was, and whoever those men were, I'd stepped into a story not meant to be told, and maybe some things are better left unspoken, drifting quietly in the shadows just beyond the ridge.